Actually, Jesus showed up first, and he helped calm me down because I was scared at first. I wasn't sure what was happening. Then he had the angels sing to me, and that calmed me down.
A young boy dies, only to return with a chilling message from the other side. What he claims to have seen...
One is the perfect version of Earth. There's no sin there, which means that it's always... There's no night. There's no glasses, no wheelchairs.
Things that no one could possibly explain has left everyone who's heard it completely shaken. What did he reveal about the afterlife? Was it just a strange dream, or did he really get a glimpse into something far darker? A boy's journey beyond life's edge. The Burpo family lived in a place called Imperial, Nebraska, a place where the days are slow, the smiles are plenty, and everyone knows your name. For Todd and Sonia Burpo, life was as simple and steady as a small-town life can get. Todd wore many hats: pastor, handyman, and devoted father. Meanwhile, Sonia balanced her role as a school teacher with being a full-time mom to their spirited 4-year-old son, Colton. Their life was built on faith, family, and a little dose of the everyday chaos that comes with parenting. But in the spring of 2023, their peaceful routine was shattered by a terrifying ordeal that would test their strength and reshape their lives forever. It all started with what seemed like an ordinary childhood illness. Colton had a fever, a stomachache, and that pitiful look all parents know too well. Sonia took charge, keeping him hydrated and rested, hoping it would pass. But instead of getting better, Colton grew worse, his mild discomfort escalating into sharp, unrelenting pain. Soon he was writhing on the floor, tears streaming down his tiny face. Sonia's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary flu. Their family doctor, a trusted figure in their lives, initially dismissed her worries, claiming that it was just a bug. But Sonia wasn't convinced. As Colton's cries grew louder, her anxiety turned to desperation. When Todd came home from work, she met him with a plea that left no room for argument. "We have to go back. Something's not right." This time, they didn't stop at their local clinic. Racing against time, they drove straight to Great Plains Regional Medical Center, Sonia in the back seat, comforting Colton, while Todd prayed quietly from behind the wheel. Once there, the truth hit them like a sledgehammer. Colton's appendix had burst, unleashing a dangerous infection throughout his small body. Emergency surgery was the only way to save him, but the odds were grim. Todd and Sonia were gutted. Sonia clung to her son, whispering soothing words through tears, while Todd leaned on his faith in the hospital chapel, praying harder than ever before. The sterile halls of the hospital became a battleground, not just for Colton's life, but for their family's hope. The surgical team acted fast, but complications mounted. Inside the operating room, the infection had spread farther than expected, and Colton's heart rate dropped dangerously low. Every beep of the monitor was a cruel reminder of how fragile the situation was. Outside, Todd paced the waiting room, his mind racing between fear and faith, while Sonia frantically called family and friends, begging for prayers. After what felt like an eternity, the surgeon emerged with news. Colton was alive, but his recovery was uncertain. Relief washed over Todd and Sonia, though it was tinged with the heavy weight of what lay ahead. Little did they know, their son's survival was only the beginning of something even more extraordinary. As Colton began to heal, he started to share fragments of an unbelievable story. It began with startling observations. "Daddy, I saw you pacing and praying in the waiting room," he said one day. Then turning to Sonia, he added, "And you were crying on the phone." Todd and Sonia froze. How could he know? He had been unconscious during the surgery, yet his descriptions were uncannily accurate, down to the tiniest details. Colton's claims didn't stop there. He recounted floating above his body, watching the doctors as they worked to save him. He described the instruments they used and the urgency on their faces, details he couldn't possibly have witnessed. But what left Todd and Sonia speechless was what came next. Colton said he had visited a place of indescribable beauty. "It was so bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes," Colton explained. "There was music, and I felt safe, like I was being hugged by the light." He described angels as radiant beings who sang songs that filled him with joy. He even claimed to have met Jesus. "He has kind eyes and brown hair," Colton said with childlike simplicity. and he showed me the marks on his hands and feet. Then came a claim that shook Sonia to her core. "I met my sister," Colton said one day, catching her completely off guard. "She hugged me and told me she couldn't wait for you to come to heaven." Sonia's heart stopped. Years earlier, she had suffered a miscarriage, a sorrow she and Todd had kept private, even from Colton. Yet here he was, describing a sister he had no way of knowing about. "She looked like you, Mommy," Colton added, "but her hair was dark." Tears streamed down Sonia's face as she grappled with the impossible. How could Colton know about the baby they'd lost? Todd, too, was shaken, his mind racing to make sense of it all. Was this proof of heaven? A message from above? Or something else entirely? Colton's extraordinary account didn't end there. He spoke of meeting his great-grandfather, a man he had never met in life. He called him Pop and described him as vibrant and young. When Todd showed Colton an old photograph, he pointed without hesitation. "That's him," Colton said. It was yet another detail that left his parents reeling. For Todd, a pastor who had spent his life preaching about faith in the afterlife, his son's experience was both a gift and a challenge. His belief in heaven had always been strong, but hearing his son's vivid, first-hand account made it more tangible than ever before. For Sonia, it was an emotional awakening, a bittersweet blend of hope, grief, and wonder. The Burpos' small-town life would never be the same. What began as a medical crisis had turned into a story that defied explanation, challenging their beliefs and captivating everyone who heard it. Their once quiet existence in Imperial, Nebraska had been transformed by a glimpse of something beyond this world, a journey through faith, love, and the extraordinary. Unbelievable tales from heaven. It started with a whisper, a simple, almost offhand remark from a 4-year-old boy recovering in a hospital bed. But what Colton Burpo said next turned his parents' world upside down. At first, Colton said something that sounded almost too strange to believe. He had visited heaven. Sure, he was groggy and recovering, but the more he talked, the harder it was to dismiss. He then revealed something that completely stunned them. He told them he had met Jesus, not in some vague, dreamlike way, but with a detail that felt so real, so personal. Colton described Jesus as having brown hair, a beard, and eyes full of kindness. The little boy said that Jesus told him it wasn't his time yet and that he had to come back to earth. Todd and Sonia were speechless. How could a 4-year-old speak so clearly about something so big? Then Colton's story started to get even more detailed. He spoke about heaven as though it was a place he knew well. He said there were angels everywhere, singing music that was so beautiful, it made him feel like he was floating. The light in heaven wasn't like anything on earth, he explained. It came from everything, surrounding him in warmth and peace. But here's where things got really eerie. One day, Colton casually mentioned he had met a sister, someone Todd and Sonia had never told him about. It hit them like a ton of bricks. Before Colton was born, they had lost a child to a miscarriage. Yet Colton described this girl perfectly. Dark hair, a little like Sonia, and someone who couldn't wait for her family to join her in heaven. Sonia's heart stopped. How could he know that? As the weeks went by, Colton's claims became more and more eerie. He spoke of meeting Pop, Todd's grandfather, who had passed away long before Colton was born. Colton didn't describe him as the older man Todd remembered. Instead, he painted a picture of Pop as a young, vibrant man. When Todd showed Colton an old photo, Colton smiled and pointed. "That's him!" It was impossible. Colton had never seen that picture. Colton then started talking about time, describing heaven as a place where time didn't exist the way we know it. Everything happens at once, he said, but it doesn't feel fast or slow. It just is. Todd and Sonia exchanged glances, baffled. A 4-year-old talking about time like that? How could he understand something so complex? Yet the certainty in his voice made it hard to dismiss. Then Colton spoke about something darker. He mentioned seeing people fighting far away, and Jesus told him it was because they needed help. Jesus said they need to love each other more, Colton said, or things are going to get worse. His voice dropped, and the weight of his words hung in the air. But it didn't end there. One day, Colton turned to Todd and said, "Jesus told me to tell you something. Todd braced himself, thinking it would be another sweet message. Instead, Colton's voice became serious. He said, "You need to take your faith more seriously." Todd froze. As a pastor, Todd had spent years leading others in their faith. Yet here was his son, barely old enough to understand the concept, telling him to step up. How could Colton know about Todd's doubts? Then came a final unsettling thought from Colton. There's going to be a lot of fighting. He said Jesus was sad about it, and that people on earth needed to change. Colton, a 4-year-old, was speaking like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. For Todd and Sonia, it was clear their son had experienced something extraordinary, something far beyond a child's imagination. But what did it all mean? Was Colton really sharing glimpses of heaven, or was he processing something his mind had created in response to his trauma? Each new story left them with more questions than answers, and the mystery of Colton's claims lingered, urging them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about faith, life, and the world beyond. The backlash that shook their faith. At first, the Burpo family thought sharing Colton's story would bring comfort to others. And it did, for a while. People were inspired by his vivid descriptions of heaven, his encounters with angels, and his meeting with Jesus. Letters flooded in from all over the country, thanking them for reminding everyone that heaven was real. But then things took a turn. Doubts crept in. Skepticism spread fast, and what was once a blessing now seemed to invite controversy. It started with whispers. People who had once supported Colton began questioning his story. Could he really have seen all that, they asked? Some wondered if it was just a dream, and the questions kept coming. Todd and Sonia tried to brush it off at first, but as more people doubted, they couldn't ignore it. What if they misunderstood what Colton had experienced? The first real pushback came when Todd started sharing their story outside their community. At first, people were eager to hear about Colton's incredible journey, but soon skeptics showed up, not just asking questions, but accusing Todd of exploiting his son. One man asked, "Couldn't Colton have overheard these stories at church?" Another woman said, "Why are you using your child like this?" For Sonia, those words were a slap in the face. Exploiting? She hadn't wanted to go public in the first place. It was Todd's idea, and now they were being accused of turning their son into a tool for profit. It wasn't just strangers. Even friends began pulling away, unsure what to believe. "I want to believe it," one friend admitted, but what? Sonia couldn't understand why it was so hard to accept something miraculous. Then a publisher reached out, and Colton's story became a book deal. At first, they hesitated. A book would bring even more scrutiny, but after much prayer, they decided to share it. They believed Colton's story could bring hope, not fame or fortune. When Heaven is for Real was released, it became an instant bestseller. The Burpos were invited to speak on TV, attend book signings, and share their story. But with the fame came something unexpected: criticism. Online critics called it religious propaganda and accused them of exploiting Colton. Some even said Todd and Sonia were brainwashing their son. The accusations were harsh. Todd tried to ignore the negativity, but it was harder than he expected. This wasn't just about faith. This was about his family and the deeply personal experience they'd shared. Even people from his own church started questioning him. "Why does Colton's heaven look like the paintings we've seen?" one man asked. "It just seems too convenient." Convenient. That word stuck with Todd. Was that what people thought? That they were making this up for fame or money? It made him sick. The book had helped them financially, but that wasn't why they shared Colton's story. They believed it could change lives. As the criticism grew, Todd started wondering if they'd made the right decision. Had they shared too much? Was it worth putting Colton in the spotlight, only for him to be doubted and ridiculed? Sonia shared his doubts but reminded him, "We know the truth. That's all that matters." But was it? One night, Todd read a comment online. "Where's the proof?" That question haunted him. Faith didn't need proof, but people wanted it. The backlash reached a boiling point during an appearance on a talk show. The host, known for tough interviews, didn't hold back. "Colton, you've told some incredible stories about heaven," she said. "But how do you know it wasn't just a dream?" Colton, now older, responded, "Because it felt real. Dreams go away, but I still remember everything. The host turned to Todd. Don't you think Colton's experience was influenced by what he's learned in church? Todd replied, I get the doubt, but the details Colton described, things he couldn't have known, convinced us. He saw family members he never met and described things he couldn't have seen in the hospital. Afterwards, Sonia asked Todd, are we making things worse by talking about this? Todd didn't know how to answer. Despite the criticism, Colton remained unaffected. To him, it was simple. He had seen heaven, met Jesus, and returned with a message. Jesus told me not to worry, Colton said one day. He said people will believe when they're ready. Those words comforted Todd, but doubt still lingered. What if they were driving people away from faith instead of drawing them closer? Then strangers began showing up at church, not to worship, but to confront Todd. You're leading people astray, one man shouted during a service. Todd was shaken. He had dedicated his life to helping people find faith, and now people were accusing him of destroying it. For Sonia, the hardest part was protecting Colton. She hated seeing him turned into a symbol instead of a child. How could they shield him from the harshness of the world? But despite the backlash, the Burpos' resolve grew. They knew they couldn't convince everyone, but they believed in Colton's story. We're not here to argue, Todd said during one tough speaking engagement. We're here to share what happened. Believe it or not, that's your choice. Even with all the criticism, letters from believers and stories of lives changed reminded the Burpos why they shared Colton's story. It's not about us, Todd realized. It's about the message. The Burpo family held on to their faith despite the growing doubts and harsh criticism. Colton's unwavering belief in his experience gave them strength, but as his memories deepened, they began to uncover unsettling details. Was there more to his story than they realized? What if the spiritual realm he saw wasn't as peaceful as they thought? The further they dug, the darker things seemed to get. Could their faith survive the truth of what Colton had truly witnessed? The mystery beyond Colton's memories. The Burpo family's life had become a maze of questions with no clear answers. Colton's memories of heaven, once a source of peace, were now laced with unsettling images. What started as descriptions of light and love began to reveal darker, hidden corners. Things Colton wasn't meant to see, and the more he spoke, the more they felt something was lurking in the shadows. It all shifted one summer evening. Colton sat under the old oak tree, still and deep in thought. Sonia, watching from the kitchen window, noticed how motionless he seemed. When she went outside to check on him, he was staring at something she couldn't see. Colton, are you okay? She asked, worried. They're here, he replied softly, a tremor in his voice. Sonia's heart skipped. Who was he talking about? He didn't elaborate and simply walked inside as if nothing had happened. Sonia felt a chill, but kept it to herself, not wanting to burden Todd with more worries. But something had changed. Over the next weeks, Colton withdrew further. His drawings became darker, filled with swirling vortexes and shadowy figures instead of angels and gates. One particular drawing made Todd freeze. It showed a figure standing at the edge of an empty void, hands outstretched, as though trying to stop someone from crossing. What is this? Todd asked, showing Sonia the sketch. She felt a knot in her stomach. I don't know, she admitted, but they needed to talk to Colton. When they did, Colton was reluctant to explain. It's just something I saw, he said, his voice trailing off. Todd pressed him. Where did you see it? Before I came back, Colton answered, the words landing like a heavy blow. Until now, they thought his memories of heaven ended when he returned to his body. But now it seemed there was more, things he hadn't shared. What else do you remember? Todd whispered. Colton looked away. There were places I wasn't supposed to go, but I saw them anyway. The room fell silent. Todd and Sonia exchanged a glance, both grappling with what Colton meant. What was he talking about, and why hadn't he shared it before? In the following days, Colton described more fragments, dark corridors, silent figures watching him, and a void that seemed to pull everything into its emptiness. These weren't the visions they expected. Todd tried to reconcile them with scripture, but nothing made sense. Sonia, though, felt a growing sense of unease. Were these the same figures he'd seen at the edges of heaven? And if so, what did they want? Colton's behavior became more erratic. He started avoiding rooms he claimed were too cold or too dark. When Todd asked why, Colton said simply, "They're waiting." Waiting for what? Todd pressed, but Colton didn't answer. The tension in the house grew, but Todd remained a skeptic. "We're just stressed," he said to Sonia, trying to brush it off. But deep down, they all felt something was off. One night, as Sonia tucked Colton into bed, he grabbed her hand and whispered, "They're closer now." "Who?" she asked, trembling. "The Watchers," Colton said. "They're waiting for me to remember." As a storm raged outside, Sonia finally asked, "Is there something you want to tell us?" Colton hesitated, then nodded. "I saw someone who told me why I had to come back." Todd leaned forward, heart pounding. "Who did you see?" "It wasn't Jesus," Colton said. "It was something else." Sonia and Todd froze. "They said I had to come back," Colton continued, "to warn people. They said things are coming." "What things?" Sonia asked, barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Colton admitted, shaking his head. "But they said people wouldn't listen unless I came back." The weight of those words sank in. This wasn't the hopeful message they had expected. It was a warning, a mystery with no clear answers. As they sat in the quiet aftermath, Todd found comfort in a familiar verse. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The words settled in his heart, reminding him that even in the unknown, God's plan was good. The next morning, Todd gathered his family. "We don't need all the answers," he said. "What matters is trusting God's purpose. Colton, your experience is a gift, even if it's hard to understand." Colton smiled with quiet confidence. "Jesus told me not to worry," he said, "and I won't." From that moment on, the Burpo family chose to lean into their faith. They couldn't explain everything, but they trusted Colton's experience was part of a bigger plan. They found peace in the truth they knew. Heaven is real, love conquers all, and Jesus is always with them. So what do you think? Was Colton's journey really a divine message from the heavens, or just a child's dreams? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.